Okay, there's a lot of stuff on the board today, which means you should pay attention to it. And since this is an exam that's more heavily weighted at the end, the material towards the end of the class, and you should know the last, well, chapter 5, 6, and 7, but what we've done in the last few quizzes, excuse me, and what we've done, what we're doing now, and what we talked about the Civil War, and we talked about the American century in class. This is since the class has covered so many historical things. This too is history, but it's history that's very close to all of you, despite the fact that you're half my age, and you haven't watched the same movies as I have. It's interesting to take a look at how Hollywood developed and what has become. American cinema has become, just like many other aspects of American culture, it's become a very dominant culture in terms of economics, in terms of ideology, in terms of popularity, and it's sort of it's a representative it's a representative system which has a lot of success domestically. Americans have always loved movies since they were invented, but audiences across the world, and pretty much any major country that has movie theaters, they want to see these. I don't know if I kind of want to call them masterpieces, but really developed. I don't think superhero movies are necessarily masterpieces. They're just, we'll get there in a minute, where they've become the movies studios, which there's not very many left, have become so powerful and rich that they can really create visual, special effects, sound, and characters and things that we never thought when I was young we could never imagine seeing the Avengers fighting on a burnt out planet against Thanos, for example. One of the most successful movies of all time is, since I hope you've seen that, those Marvel movies, Avengers Endgame. It's just those movies got to the point where not necessarily the greatest story ever written, but as in terms of its appeal, mass appeal, and the quality, the believability, and the graphics and the sound and all these kind of technological improvements that have been made, it's hard to argue that it doesn't belong at the top of one of the best movies of all time. Critics may disagree, but let's talk about this. Remember, what we call the American century was sort of, in some ways, an up and down thing. The first part of the American century was optimistic, and then they were overly optimistic, and to a certain extent, the government was involved, and the idea of progress sort of ran away with itself, so that a lot of Americans ended up, expecting that there would be a continuous improvement in the economy and American lifestyle and American society, and that simply is not the case. It's never been the case, and because of that mistaken belief, that made the crash in 1929 in the New York Stock Exchange that much worse because everybody was sort of, it was a gigantic bubble which had to burst. And when it did, there was so many businesses, so many banks, so many farmers, so many factories, and wealthy individuals and middle class individuals that lost everything. So as I said, some of these things that happen, the Hollywood development sort of overlaps because Hollywood starts in the beginning of the 20th century, around 1900, and it starts to develop. French cinema and German cinema and I'm sure Italian cinema started to develop and probably had different appeals and perhaps better quality, stories and more interesting, what we used to call moving pictures. That's why they're called movies. But very quickly, after World War One destroyed all the infrastructure, and it made it difficult for private industries and all kinds of businesses in France and in Germany and continental Europe to develop. As I said before, Hollywood, originally there was a lot of studios all over the United States, but gradually the competition increased and they gravitated towards Hollywood. And there were hundreds of different studios. There wasn't just Disney and Warner and Paramount and, there wasn't like 4 different huge, American studios. There were hundreds of them. However, these movies in the beginning were very easy to make. They were cheap. And it just goes to show part of the American exceptionalism, that the effort to invent things and experiment and try new things and fail, and make a business and then, fail a business and then try a business again. Our good friend Elon Musk, the president Donald Trump, they've all almost lost everything, gone bankrupt, restarted companies, had failed companies, and nonetheless recovered. It's a kind of never give up or an acceptance of risk, and that's what it's scary. I think most Koreans, and I'm in the same, I have the same opinion, is that a stable job, especially if you have a family, is much preferable to trying to be rich and then losing everything and starting over. That's something I hope I never have to do. But some of the most successful people, especially Americans, but not just Americans, Chinese, and it's that willingness to take risks and to accept the consequences, and then to try again, to restart and try to rebuild or come up with a new idea. So there's a lot of experimentation. Originally, there was just black and white. This is called the black and white era. This stuff is in the textbook, so I'm not really... Today, I'm going to talk about some other stuff in the final lecture when I do that in a couple days, but as you know, one of the reasons I didn't publish is my throat has been bothering me and I haven't been able to speak clearly. But on the other hand, also I felt like there wasn't enough time for all of you to study it. It is there's a lot of material, so I think having the weekend in a few days to look over your notes and prepare yourself and calm down a little bit is better than just trying to do it early and just because Christmas is coming. So it's the exam's next Wednesday. Don't remember that. And this is a very important section, so don't forget about. we split them into, in my textbook I split them into 4 eras. You may be familiar with the Taylor Swift's Eras tour, where she does music from different, decades and so on in her performance. I'm sort of doing the same thing, but I don't have the show. I don't have the money or the special effects or the popularity to do a Taylor Swift presentation. But nonetheless, there were in the 20th century 4 eras, and they kind of overlap. So the 1920s, people loved watching movies. They loved dancing. They loved, they were into stocks. They had optimistic. They were buying cars. Things looked like everything was going well until the end of the 1920s. Everything fell apart. But first there were silent films that were black and white, and then they started making movies where people could speak. And that's all part of the first era. Charlie Chaplin is the guy who has the original Hitler mustache, wears a short hat and does comedy skits without talking. He's a legend. If you ever want to just search on YouTube Charlie Chaplin, movies or something, they are quite funny. Slapstick type stuff. Towards the end of this period, getting closer to the 1940s, you end up with Wizard of Oz, and you end up with Snow White, an animated film. So you end up with Disney starting to produce its first, they're not very long, but animated movies. You get color, and you get actors that are famous. Like Wizard of Oz is Judy Garland. And Angela Lansbury is in Mary Poppins, and she's in Sound of Music. And so all of a sudden, people are watching movies for the story and everything, and the characters, but some actors are better than actors, and some people start falling in love with the actors. So therefore, this, actor draw for people to watch movies starts to get a lot more serious, where it basically means the studio is going to have to increase the salaries. If you put Tom Cruise in a movie, you pay him a lot of money because people want to see whatever the movie is. People want to see that guy act, right? Whatever actor you want to choose, whoever your favorite actor is. Denzel Washington. I'm dating myself, but I don't know. Timothée, the Wonka guy, whoever it is. Now that's the way it is, but it wasn't back then. And in the 1940s, that's sort of the golden age of the American cinema, because along comes this invention called the TV. And during the Depression and during World War II, what you did is you went out to the movies often. It was a regular activity, whatever day it was, but often on Friday and on the weekend, to get rid of your stress and, have some entertainment. The television was invented, but at first the television basically had no channels and no content. So people were still going to the movies, but as television programs expanded and became more interesting, and it wasn't just like in the beginning, you can ask your grandparents, television in Korea was on for like 9 hours a day, and all night it was off. We have 24-hour television now. We have 24-hour streaming. But when the television was invented, there just wasn't enough television shows on. So you could really just watch television in the afternoon until the evening, and then there would be nothing. There'd be no content. So around 10 o'clock, turn the television off. However, the popularity of the TV exploded, and soon, every second family in the United States, tens of millions of people had it, and they realized that, we're going to have to make better content, the movies are still always going to be better, and people are going to go see it. But from a sort of rate of, people going to the theater once a week or once every 2 weeks, all year long. Once people had televisions that were a little bit better quality, and the Ed Sullivan Show was on, and there was sometimes short movies and documentary stuff and game shows and stuff on that. Then people just started to be like, oh yeah, this Friday, why don't we just stay home and watch the Idiot Box, right? So that's what happened. So the golden age, star power continued to grow, but the golden age of TV, the golden age of the studio, the golden age of the studio really was killed by the TV. And also, in the beginning, the studios started to they own the theaters. They own the producing, they own the studio, they own the producers, they paid the directors, they own the sort of monopoly of it. That studio system was broken up. So not only did the TV start to become more competitive, but the studio system, which had making the film, the budget, paying for it, producing it, advertising it, hiring the actors, the directors, presenting it in premieres and then showing it in their own theaters, really is a sort of monopoly. It's a lack of competition. So the studio system went bye-bye, and the television started to gain more and more of a it's not like people completely stopped watching movies. It wasn't like 75% of the population was watching movies all the time, going to the theater. So now it's dropped off to 10 or 20% people go out and see movies still when they want to see a good movie, but the majority of people are just content to watch their TV, or now even worse for the movie theaters, I suppose, although the difference is slight. The streaming services also, depending on how big your TV is, you might want to just stay home. Next, 1960s. Now, the 1960s is civil rights movement. Simultaneously, there's sort of a movement in Hollywood, the classic Hollywood era. There's a lot of cowboy movies. There's a lot of like macho kind of romance movies. Gone with the Wind is earlier and stuff, but there's all these classic kind of movies. Citizen Kane is back then. New Hollywood is kind of trying to rejuvenate and make it so that we're not only watching cowboy movies and like Southern Belle romances and maybe war movies. The directors wanted to be more creative. So New Hollywood, which is not new, so it's deceiving, but this period from the Civil War, from the Civil Rights onward, includes a lot of, influence by the directors and new styles and new techniques. There's, Jaws is one of the examples of that. Steven Spielberg. There's a lot of Stanley Kubrick, horror movies, all these genres. They start multiplying and having all these different types of movies. I'm not sure when the romantic comedy was invented, but certainly thrillers and horrors and comedy movies that were predecessors to the romantic comedies, and a little bit more, already they're starting to do like more fantasy and fiction kind of things, and not just spaghetti westerns where there's two tough guys, drinking whiskey and shooting guns at each other. But for a while, the most popular type of movie in America was the spaghetti western, what we call a cowboy movie. Then we get to the 1980s, and I think it's 1977, one of my favorite movies ever, is when Star Wars comes along. And that's a perfect example. Before Star Wars happened, we couldn't imagine what it would be like in space. And if you look at it now, it doesn't look like space. It looks like a bunch of models on strings with like silly looking lasers and stuff. But it was very, very, for the people who watched it when I was young, the imagination, the space opera, the universe, the Emperor, the dark side, the lightsabers. It was a sort of science fiction revolution. They didn't have all the CGI and stuff yet, so there was a lot of like exploding things, but they made everything out of models, and they had all these, you know, costumes and makeup and everything. So special effects, adventure and action movies became popular. Things like Indiana Jones, you know, Harrison Ford was in Star Wars, and he was Sylvester Stallone, Rambo, Terminator. Hopefully, you know some of these. There's a lot of action movies and tough guy movies, and not superhero movies. They're just like action heroes, right? Macho action heroes. You gotta read that a bit in the book. Now, in the book, it doesn't say about this. This is my own idea, but I believe it's 1998 or 99. Not sure when I got the DVD. But the movie The Matrix was another moment where this is where the crazy new innovative cameras and slow motion and CGI manipulation happen, where, you know, characters they're in a computer system, and in the computer system they can basically move as if they're fighting on the moon. They can move, they can react, they can dodge bullets, right? They can fight at superhuman speeds, and the story is amazing too. It's all about hyper information, how we are overloaded by the internet, and like we are barely aware of where we are and what we're doing. So who knows if we're just living in a simulation? Maybe if you believe in God, maybe God's running a simulation, and we're just a bunch of SimCity characters down here. But in the movie, what it is a future where the Earth is destroyed and human beings have lost a war against artificial intelligence. So it's one of these dystopian futures, and iRobot, and, you know, all these other science fiction movies became, you know, very popular in the decade after that, and then all of a sudden superheroes started taking over, because finally we had the technology, the budget, the characters, the directors, the creativity to try and make movies that were as good or better than the comic books, which I have to say, that's the strategy of a studio. One of the things is that these movies, since you were born in the last 25 years, their budgets are, sometimes the budgets are 10 times or 20 times more like than Star Wars. And Star Wars is 20 times, the budget's 20 times more than the era before it. So it's just, now it's really like, if you're not a huge studio and you don't have enough money, if your movie fails, you're in big trouble, right? There's not, yeah, you got to make sure even Disney ends up, if they spend $500 million on a film and it flops and they lose $200 million, even Disney has trouble absorbing that, okay? So this is meant to be another way of looking how, just specifically how entertainment, visual entertainment and movies, Hollywood, American cinema developed. Lots of studios at the beginning, lots of competition, but because of the intense competition and the cost of the movies and the development of the types of movies that we like, that are most popular, that are most successful, now there's really only 4 or 5 big studios that have the ability to take the risk and they don't take big risks. They do Avengers 1, Avengers 2, Avengers 3. And then they do Iron Man 1, Iron 2, Iron Man 2, Iron Man 3. Because they're expecting their investment to be returned, because everybody is going to come out for the movie because of Robert Downey Jr. and because of the brand, because people like me who are older grew up reading the comics, and we want to see it, and the younger people want to see how cool the movie is, right? So towards the end of this section, it does talk about the discriminatory history there. It's not like equal representation in Hollywood. Like the awards, 99% of all the awards have gone to white people. Roles are generally given to certain actors of certain ethnicities. Even sometimes when it looks like a movie needs an Asian woman, they might have a white woman, dress up to look like an Asian woman. It seems like in the last decade or so that Hollywood's making an effort to improve that a little bit. Black Panther and Blade both include African American heroes who are the principal characters, and those are two of my favorite movies. Not necessarily because Wesley Snipes and I'm going to forget his name, but he died recently. Unfortunately, the guy who played Black Panther, they were just excellent actors, and they were perfect. They were cast perfectly. Like Robert Downey Jr. was Tony Stark, and Blade, Wesley Snipes was Blade, and Black Panther was played by an excellent actor, and it was a tragedy that he got sick and died, because surely there would have been more movies with him acting in it. So that's something to consider too. Discrimination against women, discrimination against minorities. Hollywood sometimes has a tendency to reproduce unrepresentative, stereotypical scenarios and groups of people, which when you watch them make you think that when you go to America, that's what it looks like. There's Americans in the 60s and 70s and the 80s, like every single bad guy was a Russian and a German because of World War II. You just got to watch out, think critically when you're looking at the culture that's created by Hollywood, because it is at times a propaganda machine, right? For various reasons. So you got to look at it carefully, especially as most of you are not white Americans and you're from other countries, and you just have to look at it and say, well, I like this movie, but I'd like to see some movies with a little bit more diversity and variety. And if the right director and the right studio gave a talented actor the right support, I believe that can be done. And we can have even more variety, not just Charlie Chaplin with his little Hitler mustache being ridiculous. He's very talented, but just a short little white guy dancing around, and he's really the only pre-classic Star Wars pre-classic Hollywood star, right? Okay, so think about the aspects. I've written it out pretty well here, but it's also in the textbook, so you just have to check it out for yourself. Then I'm going to talk about, in the last lecture, I'm going to talk about the presidents and make some closing remarks about American democracy and how the Americans, government system is designed to work. But after that should be enough material for you to digest. And so please watch this video, and there'll be another one arriving over the weekend for you to read as well. They're not gigantic videos, so I think you should be able to handle them. Just make sure you look over your quizzes and your notes well, and pay special attention to all the scribbles I put on the board, because naturally those are important. Same thing when you go through the book. There's lots of bold things. There's lots of, particular points. I saw students highlighting certain passages and certain, points, and that's an excellent way to study. So next Wednesday, you don't have to come on Friday. Please don't. Nobody will be there. And on Wednesday, we will conclude our class with the final exam. Thank you, everybody, for your effort. I appreciate it. Do your best. I will be as generous as I can. I know it's a tough class, so be confident and do your best, and you'll get your reward, okay? See you next week. See you in the next video, and then see you on Wednesday.